I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. How voters view the faith of the two men vying for the White House. Plus, a fast food chain takes heat after its owners voiced support for traditional marriage. Could others feel the backlash?
This could be turned on the church at some point. If we start to say, and we have said, and we will continue to say, that we're against same-sex marriage because we believe it's not marriage, we're going to be in the same boat, that we're going to be restricted because it's going to be considered to be hate speech.
And many say they've experienced miracles through his intercession. We'll head to the feast of St. Rocco.
My son had bacterial meningitis, and we prayed to St. Rocco every day. His prayers definitely performed a miracle because the doctors can't explain why my son is okay.
Good evening and welcome to Currents Week in Review, and what a week it has been. Those who tuned in know from the altar to the campaign trail, we had it covered. And with the major party convention set to get underway, the faith of the two men vying for the White House made headlines. President Obama and Mitt Romney gave written answers on the topic of faith to Cathedral Age, that's the magazine of Washington's National Cathedral. Asked to address questions regarding his Christian faith, President Obama said that there is not much he can do about it, and that his job as president does not involve convincing people that his faith in Jesus is real. Meanwhile, Mitt Romney said that the most important question to ask a person of faith seeking office is whether he or she shares the values of the equality of humankind, the obligation to serve one another, and a commitment to liberty. Romney also sat down with Catholic broadcaster EWTN, among other things. He said that if elected, he would work closely with Bishops' Conference President Cardinal Timothy Dolan and others to look at any legislation in terms of its impact on religious freedom. But how do the voters view the faith of President Obama and Mitt Romney? I talked about that this week with Carrie Funk. She's senior researcher with the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life. Carrie, it would appear overall, looking at the data, that concerns about the candidates' respective faiths are not really a priority for voters.
Yeah, what's really interesting about candidate religion this year is that we have a Mormon presidential candidate for the first time ever on a major party ticket. And in terms of President Obama, while a Protestant, he encounters a sizable minority of voters who misperceive his faith, making the role of religion and voter judgment a little more complex. Of course, when we look further, we're seeing that partisans tend to support their party candidate, and there's not a lot of movement between those two.
And I want to make it clear still, it's not to suggest this survey or anything in the survey that most voters are not placing importance on religious beliefs of a president. I mean, it is still a significant criterion when voters are actually vetting their candidate. Do you agree?
Sure. What's interesting is we find 2/3 of registered voters in the U.S. saying that having a president with strong religious beliefs is important to them. And in fact, Pew Research Center surveys going back to 2000 have found similar portions of the public saying this. So back in 2000 and 2004, 7 in 10 voters said that having a president with strong beliefs, religious beliefs, is important to them. So that has long been a criterion, and it seems, and people say it's important.
Let's dig a little deeper into the numbers. Data shows that Romney's Mormon faith is not lost on the majority. There's 60%, they know he is Mormon, and that hasn't even changed since the last time you took a poll during the GOP primaries. Why do you think this is important?
Right. Well, as you know, about 1% of the general public are Mormons, so it's not a particularly well-known religion. And we haven't had a presidential candidate from a major party ticket as a Mormon in the past, so we're interested in whether or not it makes a difference. So if you look at those who are aware of Romney's Mormon faith, we find that a majority say that they're comfortable with his religion, and another 2 in 10 say that that religion doesn't matter to them one way or another. But that leaves about 2 in 10 saying they're uncomfortable with his faith.
And
white evangelical, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, who's more uncomfortable? White evangelical Protestants tend to be more likely than other religious groups to say they're uncomfortable with Romney's faith. But most white evangelicals who are aware that Romney's a Mormon say they're comfortable with his faith.
And that, again, that seems to be part of a consensus, too. And, Carrie, I want to definitely keep this balanced. What does research say about how voters are reacting to President Obama's faith?
Sure. Views of President Obama's religion are quite different. About half of registered voters correctly identify him as a Christian. 3 in 10 are unsure of his faith, and 17% falsely identify him as a Muslim. That figure has gone up a little bit since 2008 with the growth in people falsely identifying him as a Muslim being most pronounced among conservative Republicans. Now, what's important there is that when it comes to comfort with Obama's faith, voters who know that Obama is a Christian are overwhelmingly comfortable with his faith. About 8 in 10 are comfortable, while a majority of those who say he's a Muslim are uncomfortable.
And Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, always doing this research, always gathering data. I'm interested to know, are you in the process of collecting information now to determine the effect of adding Paul Ryan to the ticket and how that may affect Romney's appeal ahead of the election?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's interesting about the vice presidential candidates is that both are Catholic. And, of course, what's difficult to tease apart is that when you vote on Election Day, you're voting for a ticket, not for president separately from vice president. So it's sometimes hard to pull apart the effect of one person versus another. You know, a separate Pew research released about a month ago found that voters have very little interest in learning more about Romney's religious beliefs. Now, in your experience conducting this research, have you ever found that opinions like the ones that you highlighted, in this case Mitt Romney's or even President Obama's faith, change radically the closer we get to Election Day? I mean, what happens is one of the reasons why we're constantly conducting polls is that we're always aware there's potential for change over the course of the election. And in fact, historically, one of the big mistakes of the polling world is when they stop polling too soon ahead of the time. And so we're always sensitive to the possibility that real changes in the campaign will change people's attitudes and feelings towards the candidates.
All right, Carrie, we're going to have to leave it there. As we know, with opinions and elections, so much is subject to change and anything can happen. So we shall see in November. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And stay tuned for more Currents Week in Review. When we return, we'll go into the deep with Bishop DiMarcio to discuss controversy involving a fast food chain over the topic of same-sex marriage. Welcome back to Currents Week in Review. I'm Liz Faublas. It was a second week of campaigning for Republican vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan. Sitting down with a reporter in Virginia, he agreed to a bit of word association.
Chick-fil-A. Had to come up.
Good chicken. Good chicken, free people exercising their free speech rights.
Ryan's thoughts on Chick-fil-A, its product, along with the stance of the company's owners on the issue of same-sex marriage. Last month, the company took heat after its chief operating officer said that those who, quote, have the audacity to define what marriage is about were inviting God's judgment on the country. The remarks led to a fierce public outcry, including efforts to get Chick-fil-A kicked off college campuses and other locations and calls to boycott the fast food chain. Our news director, Ed Wilkinson, talked about the backlash and much more with Bishop DiMarcio for this week's Into the Deep.
Bishop, thanks for being with us again.
Glad to be here.
Recently, there was a whole controversy that erupted over this Chick-fil-A franchise. Chicken sandwiches. They sell chicken sandwiches. And it got wrapped up in a same-sex marriage controversy because the people who own Chick-fil-A said that they support traditional marriage. Now, should traditional marriage and how we stand on it be a litmus test for whether or not we can do business in the community?
Of course not. It's, again, everybody is a free country. We can hold opinions that in any way we want. It's a democracy and we legislate things. Sometimes we make mistakes when we legislate. There's no guarantee that we're going to get it right. But we can't restrict people in free speech issues. Again, the problem here, and it's a real pernicious one, because they're being accused of hate speech. And this is very, you know, there are laws that constrain people about promoting hatred. But again, these people just said we promote traditional marriage, the way we understand marriage to be. Mm-hmm. And this could be turned on the church at some point if we start to say, and we have said, and we will continue to say, that we're against same-sex marriage because we believe it's not marriage. You will call it what you wish, but it's not marriage. Mm-hmm. We're going to be in the same boat, that we're going to be restricted because it's going to be considered to be hate speech. We had a case in, it's either one of the Scandinavian countries, I think it's Sweden or Norway, where one of the ministers got up and spoke against it, and he eventually got arrested and brought to court because they said he was promoting hatred. So this is a very dangerous thing that we're into right now, not understanding that in a democracy we can say what we wish within limits. I mean, there's always limits on things, and when you talk about hate speech, well, then you're getting close to the limits of what's hatred and what's standing up for your own values.
So many people, they get the impression that because we don't agree on same-sex marriage, that we don't like homosexuals. The church has an outreach to homosexual people, and we have some in our own diocese.
Clearly, there is a understanding of the need for pastoral care for those people who have same-sex attraction. It's one way to say it. They're not outcast. They need pastoral help as everybody else does. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we're going to condone same-sex marriage or bless them, or look the other way and say, well, we think that's okay. Because we don't. We don't believe that's God's law, and we're interpreting the way in which we should act based on God's law. So it is a difficult thing in an open society that we have, where individual rights have trumped everything else. There's no public morality, it's only individual rights, and this is a difficult situation we find ourselves in.
Do you get the impression that we're becoming more polarized? I mean, it seems like people are on other ends of these arguments.
Clearly, and it's almost down the middle. Any poll you take, it's almost 50-50. You know, 40, 60, some. I mean, there's no clear consensus on many, many issues of how the public thinks. So we really are, in a certain sense, really polarized.
How do you react when you see something like the Pew Research? They had a poll recently, and they polled Catholics, and they said that clearly that most Catholics know what the teaching of the Church is on same-sex marriage, but again, only about 50% of Catholics seem to go along with the Church's teaching. How do you react as a bishop to that? I mean, it must be frustrating.
Well, the first thing I would say is you have to know what the person says they're a Catholic. Are they a practicing Catholic? If we did it just with practicing Catholics, I think the percentage would be much higher.
Yes.
But if you take it with all Catholics, well, then they're not practicing the faith for one reason or another, so they have different opinions. So I think that's always, you have to make that distinction. When these polls, they do not ask a person, are you practicing or not? I think, again, people make mistakes. People are not always correct in their outreach to other people. They misinterpret charity and for condoning things that we can't condone. So we are in this kind of a predicament where people have good instincts. They want to be open to other people, and yet they go a little bit too far when they condone what things they believe are not sinful or wrong. And that's the difficulty. People make mistakes, and you're going to have this all the time.
Sure. Well, it seems like it's an issue that's been staying with us, and I'm sure we'll talk again about it. But thank you for your insights today.
Okay, you're welcome.
Don't go anywhere. More Currents ahead. Coming up, opposition to efforts by an atheist group to get an iconic cross removed from the September 11th museum. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the right to freedom of religion and freedom of expression from government interference. These principles, among others, have resonated throughout the nation as U.S. bishops, religious organizations, and individuals challenge the Obama administration's HHS mandate. Now, that requires faith-based employers to provide insurance coverage for abortion-inducing drugs at no cost to employees, regardless of religious or moral objections. As recently as Thursday, August 24th, Alliance Defending Freedom attorneys filed a federal lawsuit against the government on behalf of two evangelical Christian colleges, Grace College and Seminary in Indiana and Biola University in California. Well, closer to home, at the site of one of the deadliest attacks on U.S. territory, another fight to protect freedom of expression is playing out. 11 years ago, terrorists attacked the United States on September 11th, 2001, claiming nearly 3,000 lives and bringing the World Trade Center crumbling to the ground. The search for survivors and those who perished led to an interesting discovery: a steel girder joint that looked like a cross. St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church, across from where the Twin Towers once stood, acquired the piece, and it was modified to look more like the Latin cross of Christian tradition. The World Trade Center Memorial Fund later had the girder transported to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, but at least one group objected to that move. The organization, American Atheists, sued the WTCMF and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey last year, saying that the cross should be removed or that the museum should include displays from all religious and non-religious groups. The American Center for Law and Justice countered, urging a federal court to dismiss the lawsuit because the decision to include the cross is a permissible exercise of free speech. I spoke with Jordan Seculo, Executive Director of ACLJ, this week. Now, Jordan, the lawsuit has been in effect for about a year, and the actual controversy for a few years, actually. Now, you filed this amicus brief. In your experience, when do you think you'll have a decision, or is that just something you can't predict?
Well, we do know that there has been a motion to dismiss filed by the Memorial and Museum, and the reason why it's taken a year to get to this point, filing a motion to dismiss, and for our amicus brief, where we represent over 190,000 Americans from all across the country who have joined in support of including the cross and standing with the City of New York, New Jersey, the Port Authority, the museum, who all are part of this lawsuit, and saying, first, thank you for fighting back, and second, we'll help fight back with you. So, well, first, the case got moved out of state court into federal court, and so the first issue that will come forward is whether or not the American Atheist Organization will even be able to move forward. Okay. There will be appeals. There'll be a longer process, but I think in the next in a month or maybe a couple months, maybe a couple of weeks, you'll at least get a ruling on the motion to dismiss.
All right, here's the story. We have American atheists arguing that the cross should either be removed from the museum or symbols representing all religious and non-religious groups be displayed alongside the cross. We also have David Silverman. He's the president of the organization, saying if everyone's provided equal treatment, we're going to drop our lawsuit because fair is fair. Why is this not a viable option?
It's the cross at issue here, and this is in the museum's brief, and I think why, unlike some of the atheist lawsuits that are filed, and this is not all atheists or all people who are agnostic, these are activists, this kind of goes across the line because this is not a cross that was erected there. It was not something that an artist put together or a church donated. It's the beams from the World Trade Center that resemble the cross, and it became important to the American people and to the workers, to the families. It became a symbol. It became an artifact, and that's what the museum asserts and what we assert as well. You don't get to, say, well, you can't include an artifact unless you include, basically our symbol, and that's what the atheists ask for, this giant A. And their goal and their hope, I mean, it's sometimes laughable, but you do have to take them seriously. They file in court, they file these lawsuits. Their goal is to get everyone to say, okay, we won't include the cross. That's their hope. If you look at whenever they have victories, they're usually not actual legal victories. It's people who would rather just roll over than fight back. And thankfully, this time they picked on an organization, the Memorial and Museum, and the cities and the Port Authority who are fighting back, and that's why I think what we're going to see is the eventual outcome of this will be a win for those who support the cross's inclusion without having to put any statue anyone else wants that's not an artifact.
Right, Jordan. It is an inspirational story, the story of the cross. Not too many people can even really dispute that. And it was certainly a sanctuary amid the tragedy. But does one group of faithful really have the right to determine what does or does not constitute what's worthy of a religious memorial or historical artifact?
Well, I think what happened here is the museums also include things from the Jewish faith that were found in the rubble. And so that's, I think, the point, is that when you're talking about there's three parts of the museum. There's an introductory section about what happened on those events. It actually talks about what happened in 1993, the first World Trade Center bombing, a historical section, and a memorial.
Okay.
This is actually in the historical section. It's not supposed to be there as a memorial to the people. It's because it's part of the history. And I think that's what, you just can't deny history. You may not like that many Americans, and the majority, see the cross as this important symbol, but the museum doesn't get to change reality. And that's reality. They have it. They still had it. And I think for them not to include it, as they said, would be ridiculous, and, or else have to include any other symbol that anyone wants.
And Jordan, in the time we do have left, I really do want to address this with you and get your opinion. You've been here before. Last year, New York State Supreme Justice Paul Feinman dismissing a lawsuit by a former firefighter who argued that New York City was wrong to allow the destruction of it was a 150-year-old building near Ground Zero to make way for the Islamic Center. Now, you filed a lawsuit on the firefighter's behalf. Have you appealed that ruling yet? And you call that legal argument of American atheists offensive and absurd. Now, some may ask, does it make the legal argument any less offensive because this was an Islamic center versus a cross?
You know, actually, our lawsuit there was against the city and the Planning Commission of New York and the Landmark Preservation Commission. And because if people have paid attention or read in New York Post or any of the other New York newspapers and the reports, that project's going nowhere. We feel like we succeeded in exposing not the fact that we weren't suing the mosque, we weren't suing Muslims, we've never filed a lawsuit against another mosque in the country. It was the people behind it, and the fact that the Landmark Preservation Commission in New York really treated them differently than everybody else. And now you've got lawsuits with Con Ed. They've got so much other legal mess that we decided not to even move forward. We've actually dropped the whole case because our point was to kind of bring exposure to it, and I think nothing has changed there. 2 years later, because people found out that those were not good actors behind that, and they're not even paying their bills on the current building.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan, for the clarification on that and for making the distinction. I really do appreciate that. And thank you for being with us here today. We definitely want to touch base with you on this in the future just to catch up and see exactly what comes of the brief and of the decision.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Anytime.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And stay tuned. There's more Currents ahead. When we return, a feast that's more than 100 years old takes to the streets of Manhattan.
Grew up here, went to school here, was a parishioner here, lived here, played baseball here, and I remember this feast as a little boy. I have wonderful memories.
And finally tonight, weekends during the summer months are a time to unwind. You take in a movie, head out to a beach or amusement park, spend time with family, maybe take in some of the street festivals New York City is famous for. And this is also a time of year when the church brings its celebrations to the streets. Last month it was the feast of the Giglio and Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And last weekend, we celebrated yet another saint. For 123 years, throngs of people have gathered at the annual feast of St. Rocco. Festivities unfold in the Manhattan neighborhood between the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges. What makes this feast even more special? Well, many who attend say they've experienced miracles through this saint's intercession. Intrigued? Well, so were we. So we sent our cameras out to learn more about this celebration.
This is our 123rd Feast of St. Rocco, being celebrated in Lower Manhattan continuously for 123 years. It was founded by men and women from the Basilicata section of southern Italy. It could make me cry. To bring this celebration to a community that is no longer essentially an Italian-American community is an awful lot of work. But as you can see, the crowds are beginning to come, and St. Rocco has summoned Italian-Americans and others from the 5 boroughs, New Jersey, Connecticut, and beyond. St. Rocco was born in Montpellier, southern France, to wealthy parents. At their death, when he was approximately 18 years old, he sold all his possessions, gave his title to his uncle, and went on pilgrimage to Rome. While he was in Italy, the Black Plague broke out, and he was a layperson, but he would stop and minister to the sick. The people started to notice that his ministry just consisted of making the sign of the cross over them and they would be healed. Ultimately, he succumbed to the plague himself. So here we are to honor the patron saint of the sick, who's helped us in every way possible.
The story goes like this, that St. Rocco becomes for us a model of what we should be as followers of Jesus Christ, as someone who not only receives the body and blood of Christ, but puts it into practice every day of our lives. St. Rocco represents the concern of the church for the poor and the downtrodden. All you need to do is walk around the city and you see countless people who are in need. When we speak about the lives of any of the saints, in particular St. Rocco, we understand that we are called to imitate Christ the way they did. And it means being heroic in our lives, not just the ordinary lackadaisical Catholics, but rather being heroic Catholics and really putting into action our faith.
I grew up here, went to school here, was a parishioner here, lived here, played baseball here, and I remember this feast as a little boy. Have wonderful memories.
I've been here every St. Rocco feast ever since I was a very young child. I would always come with my dad. It's an important tradition for people to maintain their heritage.
My son had bacterial meningitis, and we prayed to St. Rocco every day. His prayers definitely performed a miracle because the doctors can't explain why my son is okay.
The pinning of the money represents thanksgiving to St. Rocco for graces that he's granted through his intercession. And when the graces are granted, people want to show their thanks, or if they're praying, they want to make these donations. All the money goes to St. Joseph's Church, and so that we can keep St. Rocco's home in good working order for years to come, as well as the American Cancer Society.
Do you ever get worried about money falling off while you're on the parade?
I have no such worries. There's so many St. Rocco devotees here, they wouldn't let anything happen to the money. I see the Feast of St. Rocco continuing forever. This is not an old people's event, which people always thought these Italian celebrations would end with the old. But as you can see, this is all generations are here, and predominantly younger people, because to carry a statue for 3.5 hours, it takes young people. I wish everyone what I say at the end of every procession, Viva San Rocco, which means hooray, or long live St. Rocco.
And that is all for this week's Currents Week in Review. Now, if you missed any part of this broadcast or any of the shows this week, no worries. Log on to our website at currentsny.net. Past shows and reports will be just a click away. We leave you tonight with more sights and sounds from the Feast of St. Rocco. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.